And first, I want to make a distinction. So we understand a family business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a Walmart, that's a Heinz, that's a Campbell Soup.
Mm-hmm.
That's different from a business family. So thank you for, elevating business family. And so when we're talking about a business family, that doesn't mean everybody is an entrepreneur. It doesn't mean that everybody works for the business. It just means that, at least through the way I've interpreted the research and the data, it just means that the family's primary wealth building vehicle is through a business.
You're listening to the Black to Business Podcast, an educational podcast providing Black entrepreneurs with the tools and resources to start and grow their businesses. We chat with vetted Black entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and business owners as they provide tips and resources to help take your business to the next level. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall. Welcome back to another episode of the Black to Business Podcast. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall, and today we are diving into a topic that's going to shift your entire perspective on wealth building. We often hear about the importance of generational wealth, but what if I told you that simply passing down money isn't enough to secure your family's future? In a world where the racial wealth gap continues to impact our communities, it's time to think bigger. Today we're talking about building Black dynasties and creating entrepreneurial legacies that can stand the test of time. Joining us is Dr. LaTanya White, a powerhouse in the field of entrepreneurship and a true visionary when it comes to redefining what wealth really means for Black families. Dr. White is a trailblazing scholar practitioner who has dedicated her career to empowering more than 10,000 socially and economically disadvantaged entrepreneurs across the globe. She's the founder of Concept Creative Group, LLC, and the creator of the pioneering Dynastic Wealth framework, which challenges the conventional wisdom of wealth transfer and focuses on building lasting dynasties through entrepreneurship. With a rich background in research on intergenerational wealth transfer and the racial wealth gap, Dr. White brings a unique and vital perspective to our conversation today. So if you are ready to stop just thinking about wealth and start building something that lasts, something that your grandkids and that their kids will thank you for, then you are in the right place. This episode is packed with the kind of insights that will take your business and your legacy to the next level. So let's dive in.
Dr. White, welcome to the Black to Business Podcast. I tell you, it is a treat to have you on the show, and I am so honored that you are here. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Monique, and to the team.
Yes. So I'm really excited about today's topic because it's something that we've never talked about on the Black to Business Podcast, never heard of. And I'm always amazed when I have guests like you who have their own way of doing business and making us look at business a different way. So today we're going to talk about beyond this generational wealth that we know and building Black dynasties through entrepreneurship. Yeah. So before we get into it, I would love it if you could share a little bit about your background. What is it that you do and how did you get here in your business today?
Sure. So I am Dr. LaTanya White. I'm the CEO and founder of Concept Creative Group. And in a nutshell, we help Black founders and their families package, protect, and pass down wealth. And how I landed at this place was so I taught entrepreneurship at the Florida A&M University.
Yes.
I taught there for 11 years. I also taught other classes, but the entrepreneurship class was my favorite class to teach. So probably maybe 4.5 years into teaching, I looked at the time FAMU had an enrollment of about 10,000 students, and I would get, maybe 10 or 12 students that would enroll in this entrepreneurship course. It was an elective course. It was like housed, I'm doing my air quotes, it was housed in the School of Business and Industry, but I didn't really understand what the mechanics were until I looked around at the enrollment and was like, well, where is everybody, right? Like, where are y'all?
Yeah.
Because I can change your life up in these four walls right here. So I did some due diligence and learned that there was a prerequisite course that was required in order to enroll in the entrepreneurship class. And I don't know how long it's been since you had to decide what you were going to use your electives for, but to get in this entrepreneurship course, if you weren't a business major or a communications major, you actually had to use 2 electives.
Ooh.
And ain't nobody doing all of that,
right? They're trying to get out. What?
Exactly. So, but me being entrepreneurial, right? And we understand entrepreneurs identify a problem, we theorize or test the solution, and then we tend to the goal is to monetize that solution. So I was at the place where I was presenting this solution, which was to remove the prerequisite. And come to find out, like, higher ed just is not entrepreneurial in general. So, I learned that the hard way, right? Here I am thinking there is a problem our students are facing, and it really it's not in alignment with the goal of higher education and specifically HBCUs, where ultimately this educational attainment is supposed to get us to economic mobility. And so I didn't know how to make that argument now, right? Because I'm on the other side of the research dissertation. At that time, I was very passionate, like coming at it from a very heart-centered place. And that's how I ended up in grad school, really just trying to prove the argument that access to entrepreneurship education needed to be easier, needed to be more accessible, and especially on the campus of the HBCU, where the student enrollment had 85 to 90% students who are still first generation college students. So that's how I got here. Essentially, my research, I ended up going down the rabbit hole of the racial wealth gap, which is where I was able to find this existing data that showed that entrepreneurship created an accelerated pathway to economic mobility, to wealth building, and pathways to wealth. But the real gem of that very long process that I'm just now finishing my PTSD was that our high net worth, our ultra high net worth counterparts, we talk a lot about the Rockefellers in the broad sense, but they're doing something so much more strategic with their wealth than what Black communities, Black families, and Black founders, what we tend to understand about wealth and wealth transfer.
Wow. That is such a powerful intro. And you know what? It makes me go back because I'm really trying to think. So I went to Howard and I was in the business school, HBCU, of course. And I think when you were talking, I'm thinking about even in my story, how entrepreneurship, I think I took that my junior year and I don't even know if it was a requirement. And I honestly always say, like, I didn't know it was a possibility to be an entrepreneur because in the business school, they push you to corporations. And I'm like, first year I was working with internship at Goldman Sachs and I was like, this is not it. So not even thinking, what are the other options for us? But as soon as I got into that entrepreneurship class, I'm like, this is it. And I oftentimes think about, had I known earlier.
Yes.
So I'm so glad the intro just gives me chills. Love the work that you're doing. love it. Yeah. So let's get into this concept of dynastic wealth. So I've heard of the traditional concept of generational wealth. So as you kind of like touched on, can you explain what you mean when you say dynastic wealth and what's the difference between that and that traditional concept of generational wealth?
Sure thing. So I think the easiest, probably most impactful place to start is with the question. So we talk, like I said, we've talked and we hear in pop culture on social media, what would the Rockefellers do? What did this family do? What about the Vanderbilts, right? So let's think about the Rockefeller family, who, as recently as 2018, I hadn't pulled the data any more recently than that. That family ranked among America's 25 wealthiest families in the country, but they don't have a core business the way, like Black to Business, like Content Creative Group, like Walmart. So, and John D. Rockefeller, who established Standard Oil, which built the family wealth, that company broke up in 1911. So we're talking over 100 years ago. Now, is it really possible for one family to maintain 7 or 8 generations of that much wealth by just passing down money? Right? And so, like, even asking the question kind of gives me chills, because the answer can't be it absolutely, that cannot only be what they were doing. And so as I was being introduced to this concept of entrepreneurial dynasties, and that's where I learned that a family will reach dynastic status once it has controlled, so not just owned wealth or owned assets, but controlled assets for 3 consecutive generations. Now, and kind of get into your question on the distinction between dynastic wealth and generational wealth. In private wealth communities, there is a saying, it goes shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And what they're talking about is that first generation founder, like such as myself, right? First generation wealth creators that I study and that I work with are literally like getting it out the mud, like rolling up your shirt sleeves and getting to work, building the business, creating income, creating wealth, right? That's the first generation. The second generation is often as the beneficiaries, they live a much softer life, like as we like to say, but they hadn't traditionally been involved in the business operations. They're just benefiting from the hard work that first generation did. And then by the third generation, right? And so this is where we start to hear the statistics that by the third generation, the wealth has dissipated. And that's through no fault of the members of the third generation. It's typically because the second generation didn't have the business savvy. They didn't have the exposure. They weren't involved in the operations. So how can I pass down something I didn't have? Now, in dynastic families and through this framework for dynastic wealth, it's more than just money. And as I was submitting the trademark and intellectual property application for dynastic wealth, you have to make the justification. Why is this new and novel? How is it different from any word search for these 2 phrases put together? And what I included in my trademark application was, this is designed for Black and other socially and economically disadvantaged individuals and their lived experience around business development, entrepreneurship training, and wealth transfer. So in and of itself, the framework for dynastic wealth is about the Black experience, period. Now, how we operationalize that is through these 5 different forms of wealth. So when we're talking about generational wealth, typically we're thinking about financial wealth. We're thinking about real, tangible assets, right? And maybe we're thinking about, and I have a 9-year-old daughter, so and her name is Sparrow, like the bird. So thank you. So let's think of generational wealth from me to Sparrow. I'm probably thinking of my home. Maybe if I sell Concept Creative Group and whatever financial assets that brings about, I'm thinking of transferring that down to Sparrow and hopefully exposing her enough to what I've done where she's able to protect it enough to pass it down to her children. So that's one form of wealth in one direction for one, maybe two generations. Okay. So that's typically how we understand generational wealth. Dynastic wealth also looks at these qualitative forms of wealth because we've been socialized to believe our lived experience doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Our family stories have no value. Our family recipes are just, they just are what they are. But those are, as one of our BIA colleagues would say, those are lies of the enemy.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because Campbell soup, I'm sure that came from a family recipe.
Right. That is true.
Heinz ketchup, these are family names.
Right.
So why on earth can't Auntie's macaroni and cheese?
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
The recipe.
So dynastic wealth, we're talking of financial wealth, those tangible, quantifiable assets. But we're also looking at spiritual wealth, like the my family identity, my family's values. Those things are wealth creating tools. Yes. Our wealth of knowledge. So the family recipes, whose name is on the deed to grandma's house? What's our family? How did our family get here? That's wealth. Intellectual wealth, the things that I'm passionate about, my skills and my abilities, and not just me as the entrepreneur, but my cousin who loves to do stuff with his hands. That's intellectual wealth. Right. That can be packaged and protected. And then we get into relational wealth. That's the value of my relationships, right? My social capital. How do I transfer that to Sparrow or to my sister or to my mom? So where the paradigm is wealth is this hard money construct, in reality, these high net worth and ultra high net worth families are packaging all of this information about their families, about the businesses, about their relationships, and they're passing that down too.
Right.
We haven't been privy to is the actual truth about what wealth is, how it accumulates, and how we transfer it.
Yeah, that is so beautifully put, because it puts I mean, you're perfect. It puts it all into perspective. All the things we were not or do not think about, and how it might not be now, but future, like you're saying also. And so, Dr. White, how does your evidence-based framework account for like structural racism and this post-traumatic slave syndrome?
Oh, and this is where the work begins.
Deep breath.
Yes, because one of the when you think about, so if anyone in the listening audience or anyone on your team has heard of that book, What Would the Rockefellers Do? Right? They get in there and they talk about these infinite banking, like life insurance, like a specific type of life insurance policy. Of course, they talk about the family trust and all of those things, that legal vehicle that protects the assets. But what about the family trust? What about trust within the family? Yes. Right. So in order for me to talk to my mom, my aunt, or talk with my grandmother when she was still with us, there needs to be a significant level of trust between us. And again, if we are not aware enough of what systemic racism, like the narrative that it plays, the stories that it tells us, then I'm going to fall into the belief that I should not be talking to my family about money. And so the whiteness of wealth, so post-traumatic slave syndrome and the whiteness of wealth are two books that literally shifted. I mean, we're talking about brain chemistry, like just change the way I understand how I show up in the world, how I interact with my family, how I talk with Sparrow about money, my own relationship with money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the framework for Dynastic Wealth, when I'm working with Black founders and their families, we start with those foundational material. We start with understanding that we've been socialized to not trust each other.
Mm-hmm.
We've been conditioned with a scarcity mindset, because if I am made to believe that you can't have it if I have it, then I won't question the white man or the system, right? Air quotes, the system, when they say I have it, so you can't have it. And that's structural racism, like played out in our lives day to day, scarcity mindset. But you can't tell me that if Wells Fargo CEO is making all the millions of dollars he's making, it ain't enough for me.
Right.
Oh, no. I'm sorry.
Right. It's true.
Not having it.
Yeah. And I love that aspect of trust. And it makes me think about like us being in BIA, Black Innovation Alliance. That's a big thing. It's like trust, they always talk about. And I love that because we have to recondition our minds. Okay, so let's talk about why this is important, because I know how you talked about how you had to change your mindset and things like that. So for people who are listening, why is it important for Black entrepreneurs to think beyond generational wealth to building dynasties?
As I was conducting my dissertation interviews, and I interviewed first generation Black entrepreneurs, because I that was a story that's just been left out entirely. Like, you can't find a first gen business owner, you can't find their stories. So that means I can't learn from your mistakes, right? So I really wanted to elevate those stories and the lived experience of those entrepreneurs. And as I was doing so through the interview process, and everyone was in the beauty industry. So in some shape, form, or fashion, they were in the beauty industry. And as we were going through the interview process, one of the themes that emerged was I felt like I was starting from scratch. And as I'm reliving, because I'm envisioning, I'm like back in that moment right now, speaking to them. And a part of the criteria was to be a first generation entrepreneur, right? Like, you had not inherited any business, you hadn't inherited any assets or anything like that. But Monique, right, as we're going through the interview questions, literally 7 out of 10 of them said, well, my grandmother did this, or my aunt had that, and my mom. I'm like, but wait, you said you said you were a first generation entrepreneur. And they did see themselves as first generation. And it wasn't so much that they hadn't received the business itself, or they hadn't received any assets. It was they hadn't received any mentoring, any knowledge. And so I had to reform my questions, because I was like, we too close to the end. So it became entrepreneurs who identify as first generation. And so a part of the reasoning behind this aspect was, how do we make sure that Sparrow, my cousins who are in her generational cohort, your nieces, your God, how do we make sure they don't feel like they're starting from scratch? Because I don't know about you, but if I just had someone I could go to talk through about some of these things. Yeah,
it's true. I love that, because it's like, when you're speaking, I'm like, I always think like, why I had to go first,
right?
Why can't I be second or third? I always think that, like, oh my goodness, a lot when you go first. And then as you were talking, it reminds me, I was thinking to myself the other day, even because for me, I relate to what you were speaking to those other people in that I'm thinking first generation as well. But it's like, I felt like, and I look back and I'm like, well, my granddad, he was known around town for selling watermelons. Like he would make away with watermelons. Although he still worked on the farm and in the fields, he still was like known as the watermelon man.
I love that.
They was like, Mr. Clyde, you can get a watermelon. But yes, I can relate to that so much. And also, like, speaking of like setting up those future generations. So let's talk about setting that foundation and starting with that vision. So how can entrepreneurs who are thinking like, that is me, how can they set that vision that goes beyond their lifetime and start to think of this that benefits those future generations?
So one part of the framework for Dynastic Wealth, if you ever see the image, there is the box right beneath Dynastic Wealth, and it says generative intent or the generative script. And generativity is what it's a characteristic, right? It's emerged from research on human development and how we mature from childhood into young adulthood into adulthood. And the basis of generativity is that the work that you're doing, no matter how frustrating, like we were just talking about, how frustrating your coworkers might be, your business partners might be, this entrepreneurship journey in general, you're committed to it because you want to create better opportunities. You want to create better economic position for the people that are going to come behind you. You don't want them to have to start from scratch.
Right.
And so when we understand that, because sometimes we don't have the language for why we do the things we do. Like, why, Lord, am I still?
It's true.
And so when we talk about establishing that vision, even if it comes down to how do you want your nieces and nephews, your great nieces and nephews, how do you want them to feel about life? Right? Because sometimes a part of our day-to-day experience is about what we think we don't have and how that shapes how we show up in the world. So what is that vision that you have for people who are going to come behind you that you may never meet? And how does that help you determine, well, what am I going to commit to today? Is it going to be, because we can be booked and busy, but not productive and profitable. Sometimes those are not the same thing. So establishing that vision is really about who are we here to serve, right? What is our purpose, and using the gifts that we've been given in service to others. And so I'll also make sure to say that I'm a social scientist. So yes, I have a business background and the research and everything, but I'm a social scientist. Like, I'm looking at things from the human experience and not just what do the numbers say.
Yes, all around, well-rounded. Perfect. Yeah. So then what role, because we talk about the ancestral narrative and where we came from. So what role does really understanding this play into the narrative of the vision?
And we can think about your granddad, right? Just as you shared this example, and we go back, and for the little that some of us know about our elders and our ancestors, there is obligation isn't the right word, but there's almost a responsibility to provide a return on their investment. Because, like, I'll tell Sparrow, there's no way in the world that my grandmother raised 9 kids on her own for the most part, for Sparrow 4 generations later to be struggling the way she's struggling.
Right. Exactly that. It's true.
Like, it's no need for her to not be empowered to understand what she's capable of, because it's literally coursing through her veins. And so making sure that and this is where that wealth of knowledge comes into play.
Yeah.
This is where capturing the family history is so valuable, because there is somebody's legacy that we are walking around either upholding or tearing down. And so when you understand the impact of the words that come out of your mouth, the actions that you take, how you post on social media, how you show up on podcast interviews, how you're adding value, you're either building up or tearing down someone's lifetime work through just what you're doing. And so there's a major responsibility in managing that in a way that continues to create a return on that investment.
Powerfully said, powerfully said. And I think that in all of this, we want to make sure also that this aligns with the long-term vision. So values. So how can entrepreneurs make sure that their business values align with that long-term dynastic goal?
I love this question because in the financial wealth pillar of Dynastic Wealth, one of those tactics or one of those tacit steps is brand identity. And so, again, I'm a social scientist. Yes. So even in the technical assistance that I provide for entrepreneurs through, say, the Capital Readiness Program, which is historic funding from the Minority Business Development Agency, it has earmarked, or actually the Department of Treasury earmarked $125 million in no-cost technical assistance for entrepreneurs like us, for socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, right? So in the technical assistance that I'm providing, we're talking about business model canvas, and eventually we make our way to blue ocean strategy and things of that nature. It still comes down to, but who are you?
Right.
Like, do you know who you are? Like, who are you as your core identity? Because that's going to translate into the business. It's going to translate into the brand. It's going to translate into, again, how do you show up? How does your brand show up? So we aren't connected to who we are, right? We were talking earlier about me reconciling my identity.
Yes, you were.
Right? Like, as a founder, it is, I think, imperative, especially from this perspective of the state of mental health for entrepreneurs and Black entrepreneurs in this day and age. It's imperative to be connected to our own core identity so that we can communicate our core values, so that as we're bringing on our key employees, as we're expanding the business, bringing on our C-suite team, we're able to communicate those core values of the business in a way that's deeply authentic, right? That, because we know this road is going to get hard. You're going to be burning the midnight oil and burning the candle from both ends. There's something that has to keep you in business mentally in order for you to stay in business operationally.
I love that. And so if someone were listening and they're like, okay, so what are some of the steps that I can take to start to get on track? What steps would you say one can take to start the journey of building a family business dynasty?
So, I love this question. I'm gonna start with business model canvas, right? Okay. Like, because we still, from a technical assistance perspective, right, we still need to know and be able to articulate, well, how do we make money? Exactly. So how do we make money? And business model canvas is a great way to help organize your thoughts. The next step, as we move into spiritual wealth, I suggest that founders or any person in the family because typically it's only one or two people that are in the family actively talking about wealth or trying to talk about wealth. It's a great way to start with a wealth personality quiz. I had to do this with my family. I was trying to figure out, well, how do I translate all this that I'm reading, all this that I've built this passion for, and be of service, right? How do I do this with my family? And so I didn't know where to start. But I was able to use the excuse of, well, I need to learn how to build surveys. I need to learn how to collect and analyze data for this dissertation I'm writing. So I created.
You got a man.
Listen, I created this wealth personality quiz, and it was maybe 10 questions. There was one question, though, in the social sciences, it's called a disorienting dilemma. It's basically, you feel like you're in the matrix. But the one question is, what's your vision for wealth? And so I shared out the survey with, it was probably about 25, maybe 28 adults over 18 in my family that I asked to complete this survey. And so out of those 10 questions, this one question, what's your vision for wealth, is what really just threw me completely off kilter. The options that the majority of people selected was, what vision? And so we're educated. We got degrees out the yin yang, real estate, health. So what are we working so hard for if we ain't got no vision, though?
Yeah, true.
And it threw me. So starting with a wealth personality quiz is probably the best place for anybody, because first off, the answers are anonymous. No one gets them except for the person that responds. But now you have a conversation starter, right? Now you can go back to your cousin and say, well, did you get your quiz results? What did it say?
Yeah, I want to do this.
And then we get to this place where, okay, I can relax a little bit, because it showed me some things about myself that I didn't even know. And that's how families can get started on the conversation of building a dynasty.
That's beautiful. So I love that, because it's the conversation starter. And then for people, we also mentioned before how it kind of fails usually at that third generation. So I want to talk about some strategies to make this process smooth. So what are some effective strategies to ensure that there is a smooth transfer of these 5 forms of wealth within the Black business family?
Yes.
I'm excited.
I'm thinking because, and first I want to make a distinction. So we understand a family business, right? So that's a Walmart, that's a Heinz, that's a Campbell Soup. That's different from a business family. So thank you for, elevating business family. And so when we're talking about a business family, that doesn't mean everybody is an entrepreneur. It doesn't mean that everybody works for the business. It just means that, at least through the way I've interpreted the research and the data, it just means that the family's primary wealth building vehicle is through a business. So we'll put that there. Doesn't mean everybody needs to be an entrepreneur, but when we're talking about the business family, it really comes down to making sure that as many generations and as many people, you can probably hear me smiling because I'm thinking about my grandmother. She was 91 years old when she passed, but she was involved in our conversations. So it was my grandmother at 91. I think my oldest aunt or uncle is mid 60s. Then it was my cousins and I, and then Sparrow and her cousin. So 4 generations, right? And each generation, and like I said, because not everybody's going to want to be a part of it, and we have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
We have to give them grace. But as many people that want to be a part of this work should be invited, and making sure that their voice is valued. The real key is we got to stop having, and I'm smiling through my pain. We have to stop having family reunions.
Wait, you said stop having family reunions? Wait, okay, tell me more, because I'm like telling my family, y'all need to get it together. So I want to know more about this.
I'm smiling through my pain because the first time I said it to my family, I swear I almost got disowned. My auntie was like, yeah, we'll see.
I almost pulled the mic.
But these family retreats are much more oriented around passing down the information. So we love, this is not to say that we can't have a family reunion at all, but we need to add another dimension to our gathering of the family.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah. And so in the family retreat, all generations are involved, right? So Sparrow and her cousin, they will ceremoniously open the family retreat by reading our family constitution. But what's our family constitution? Who are we as a family? What are our family values? How do we make our wealth? That's our family constitution, right? So that's how the youngest generation is involved. My generation, so my cousins and I, we would more than likely be reviewing our portfolio. Where did we invest the money that we built, that we put in to build this family trust? Because my family is literally putting in cash because we have nothing to start with. So where do we put it? Real estate investment trust, infinite banking, the stock market. And what were our capital gains and what were our emotional gains from those investments? My mom and her siblings, they're looking at, okay, so Tanya, she submitted a request to withdraw money from the family trust. Does her application pass the litmus test? Like, what does our return on investment look like? So we get into the habit of making these pitches. Things that we are just now being introduced to as founders become normal. They become a part of how our family interacts with each other. And then you have your eldest generation literally just enjoying the fruits of their labor, literally just seeing the prayers they prayed manifest. And so that's the family retreat version.
Yeah. Okay, I'm on board. This I can get with. Now, people are thinking, they're like, okay, this sounds amazing. But Dr. White, what is that legal, those protections and all of those things looking like when you are talking about transferring wealth or just having these types of conversations? So what legal and financial tools should be considered for this?
So now I'm not a lawyer or a financial advisor. I did think about going, but I was like, no more schooling for right now.
Right.
But to your point, one of the things, another project that I'm working on is establishing a family office for Black founders. And so a family office, for those that aren't familiar, brings in your legal professionals, your financial professionals, and and everybody's working towards that family's goals. So one of the things that I'm doing in the meantime, as we establish the Black office, which is the family office for Black founders, right, is I serve on the board for the Association for Black Estate Planning Professionals. And when I'm working with Black founders and their families as a part of their Dynastic Wealth portfolio development, is I'll match them with an estate planner. So I will help them, because these trust documents, the 47-page document I got will be the same one that you get and the same one that any other listener would get, except we don't have the same lived experience, right? So a part of the work that I do is helping that family to shape and customize their trust document so that when they sit with the legal professional, the estate planning professional, they have agency they have their voice and what's important to them, their values are showing up in that document.
I love that. Yes, getting the things in order. And one of the things you also spoke about is the fact that everyone won't be on board, or everybody might not agree. So how can families overcome challenges related to communication and alignment of goals?
And that's really where so in the development process, the reading circle. So it's not necessarily a book club, right? So I mentioned post-traumatic slave syndrome. I mentioned the whiteness of wealth, and helping to work with the families to build out their dynastic wealth documents in their portfolio is I'll facilitate a reading circle. And because have to start by making sure everyone has the same information.
Right.
Even so, no matter where you are in the learning process, we started at the same place. Now, you might go further faster, but that just means you can bring me with you faster as long as I'm in the game with you, right? So facilitate the reading circles, basically asking and elevating questions or topics from the whiteness of wealth in this book titled Entrusted. And that book really is written by two estate planners, but that book really helps you give language to your family values, especially if it's something you've never talked about. And those words, those characteristics, like that family identity shows up in your family constitution. So until more of us are familiar with this process, until more of us are comfortable leading these kinds of conversations in our families, I strongly advise a facilitator, possibly a mediator. Like there are going to be some wounds so deeply embedded in our families that we might need a mediator and our own individual therapeutic plans. Like I know I needed to sit down with a mental health professional before I call myself talking to my auntie about what she gonna do with her money.
Oh yeah, auntie, the elders, the older people. Yeah, nah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great advice, and it's like coming into it with a plan, and these are the steps to take. So, Dr. White, are there any key resources or tools that you recommend for someone who's just starting out on this journey?
Oh, I can't say enough about Dorothy A. Brown and the whiteness of wealth. I can't say enough about it, Monique.
Yes.
And I think it's so impactful for me because that was the book that helped all the members of my family see themselves in the wealth building process, because I was coming to the discussion, right? I was trying to facilitate the discussion strictly from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Yeah.
But I'm a first generation entrepreneur, right? Like nobody else could really relate to the wealth building argument because I was coming at it from a very, very exclusive perspective. But we're talking about being inclusive, making sure everyone feels like they belong, and the whiteness of wealth can do that. The book talks about racism in university endowments, how we choose where we purchase our homes and how that impacts the educational journey of our children, how how racism shows up in the listen, that's the place to start. The wealth personality quiz, and I can be sure to share that link with you, and the whiteness of wealth, hands down.
I have to, so I've got to look that one up. I'm going to add that to the show notes, but I definitely have to add that to my reading list because I have not read it. And I can just tell you got to read it.
Yes.
So yes. So let's talk about the work that you are doing, because this has been phenomenal and some additional support for our listeners. So how can your Dynastic Wealth Framework support Black entrepreneurs in their wealth building journey?
So actually every Sunday from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern, I host the Dynastic Wealth Wealth family calls, because I'm really working to normalize how we see wealth, how we interpret wealth, right? And really redefining our definition of what wealth looks like for Black families and Black business owners. And so to your question, in the Dynastic Wealth family calls, because we family now, right?
Yes, we are.
Right?
We are in many ways.
Exactly. And in the family calls, what I'll do is I'll pull up the framework, the Dynastic Wealth framework. And on that visual, we see the 5 pillars, but there are also, like I said, these tacit steps, right? There may be 5 steps under financial wealth, but that still means you need to be talking to a financial advisor. How do you know what questions to ask? How do you know how your business, like, is your business structured in the most profitable way? And so these are the kinds of questions and dialogue that we have on the Dynastic Wealth family calls, open to the public. Find me on LinkedIn, meet Dr. White on LinkedIn, send me an email, and I'll share the Zoom link, because I promise there's no way I cried over this keyboard to write that dissertation to keep all that information to myself. So I think that's probably the least path of resistance is, being in proximity. It's so much about being in the room, whether it be virtual or in person. That proximity can unlock so many doors. And I think that's a great place to start. And I'd love to, connect with your audience to help do that with them.
Most certainly. I'm going to share that, and we'll definitely talk about ways to do that too, because I've gained so much value from this conversation, and I'm sure others who are listening have as well. And I want to talk about any other specific services or resources that you offer to help families navigate this process.
Oh my goodness. So I'm so excited. I'm so excited about that question, because I was speaking at the Nueki Beauty Bar conference down in Hampton, Virginia. It was Father's Day weekend, and I mentioned the Dynastic Wealth family calls. I was also talking about the Capital Readiness Program, and one of the attendees, she stayed in touch. She followed up. She came to like the first 2 or 3 family calls, and then the next week, I saw 2 more attendees with the same last name. I was like, okay, but I didn't want to make assumptions.
Yeah.
When I say it was her husband, her nephew, it was just so moving. And so between the Capital Readiness Program, which provides that technical assistance I was referring to, and through the Capital Readiness Program, because I'm one of the training providers, the Dynastic Wealth Training Academy is actually available at no cost, because essentially the government is paying for people to have access to it. And so you can sign up for the Capital Readiness Program. You don't have to already be in business. You can be thinking of an idea for a business to get into the Capital Readiness Program, which then gives you access at no cost to the Dynastic Wealth Training Academy. And so it's those kinds of things, like the way God moved and God opened up that opportunity. I would not be able to use my gifts for such a time as this.
That is beautiful. Well, there is no reason why we should not be wealthy at this point, because we have the resources in front of us. I would definitely put that information for everyone to have access as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Dr. White, speaking of, you mentioned crying over the keyboard, how you put a lot into this work. So how can listeners get involved with or access your work, your research? Like, what are some ways that people can learn more about that?
Yes, thank you for that question and for creating the opportunity for me to share that. Now, I do have an Instagram profile, but I don't be on there. So
All right now.
But LinkedIn, like
Okay.
LinkedIn. So, Concept Creative Group, that's the name of my firm. Please follow the page. I post Dynastic Wealth research. Our team posts when I'm speaking at different conferences. I was just at the U.S. Black Chambers Conference. I'm excited about attending and speaking at the Association of African American Museums conference about Dynastic Wealth. Yes, so Concept Creative Group or Dr. LaTanya White on LinkedIn.
Yes, yes, I love that. And Dr. White, we have spoken about a lot, and one of the things that sticks out, of course, is the fact that first generation and going first, and a lot of listeners are in that same place. So for you, when you were going through this journey, like, what do you feel like kept you going? And for somebody who's listening that might be struggling with going first, what advice would you give to them based on your experience?
It's so I also consider myself a Black wealth futurist. I'm always looking at the future of Black wealth and wanting to make sure that that story is told from an asset-based perspective, where we don't have to continue to be reliving the trauma day to day, right? So, to answer your question, when we think about the challenges and the frustrations, think about what it will be like 3 generations from now. And what will those people, when they look back in their family history and they come across your name, what do you want them to say about what you created for them? And if, like, let that be what fuels you. Let that be what carries you, because that is real wealth, right? When we make a way, when we make it easier. And that's what dynastic wealth is about. That's what generativity is about. And literally, that's your birthright and theirs.
Powerful words. And my last question is, what does it mean to you to be Black in business?
Listen. It means freedom in every sense of the word. Now, when I was up until 2023, because I had my consulting practice, I started the business in 2011, but I'd also been teaching full time and going to school full time and raising a child full time. So I actually was not an entrepreneur. It wasn't until I separated from the university. Love FAMU, always will, but I was not free to create this kind of impact. And so to be Black in business in this day and age means that I get to change people's lives for literally for generations to come.
Powerful, powerful, powerful. And I feel it. Dr. White, you are phenomenal. This has been phenomenal. And just thank you for the work that you are doing, enlightening us today, because I was very enlightened. Yeah, just thank you so much for pouring into the Black to Business podcast and being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It means so much. I'm so glad to be of service to you all.
Okay, so first I have to ask you, did you react the same way as me when Dr. White said no more family reunions? At first I was like, what you talking about, Willis? But then when she explained what we should be doing instead are family retreats, I was totally on board for that, because turning those family gatherings into something that not only brings us together, but also builds a legacy. I love that, and I'm here for it. It's all about making sure that the next generation is equipped with more than just memories. We're talking about passing down knowledge, values, and wealth. So in today's episode, we cover a lot, from redefining what wealth means for Black families to building dynasties that can truly stand the test of time. And I hope you walked away with something powerful and some new ideas on how to approach your own wealth building journey, because I sure did. And on that note, thank you so much for being a part of the Black to Business family. Your support means everything as we continue to push the culture forward together. And for more on the resources that were mentioned in this episode. And to learn more about Dr. White, head over to blacktobusiness.com/213. And don't forget to tune in next week because we got another great episode lined up for you that you do not want to miss. But until then, keep building, keep growing, and keep pushing the culture forward. Later.